Hello, it's me, Jakob. Just wanted to talk about The Wheel of Time, written by Robert Jordan, which was completed probably 10 or 20 years ago at this point, but it's made an Amazon TV show about it recently you might have seen, which is not very like the book at all, as I learned. But yeah, it was a good book series, 14 books, pretty thick books, usually 700 or 800 pages. Um, it's got a fun little world. My partner read it many years ago, many times, so I was reading it for the first time with her aloud, and we read it aloud for all 14 books. We would trade off every other chapter or whenever we could, and yeah, it was a good way to read the book. You sort of have to come up with other ways to say things after a while, so like the Shan Chan is a little hard to pronounce, for instance. This one in the top left here. They're a race of people across the ocean who come at some point, and we had trouble pronouncing it consistently because I'm a little dyslexic and she's got her own issues, so we just used to call it, the Sean Bean are coming. Just say Sean Bean because it's the same amount of letters, and that's kind of why it works. And a lot of other ones kind of worked like that throughout the book. Like there's a guy whose name is like sounds a lot like David Carradine, things like that. A lot of unusual names, because a lot of the names in the world have a specific naming convention. They're a little hard to pronounce. They're kind of based on Earth in some ways, so each nation of people are a little different, and you can kind of get used to them over the course of the books, which is nice. He does a good job explaining the culture of each place as you get there and explain what's happening and who's important and what's going to happen next. So he's got a nice strict fantasy level to the world. There's basically light and dark, good and evil. Traditional kind of like easy storyline of some good hero characters, some real bad villains. It doesn't really get super dark. There's a bit of torture here and there, um, like evil compulsion, that sort of thing, but nothing triggering, so to speak, for some people. So it's a nice book for that reason. It feels a little young adult, or perhaps a little just fully adult, just because it tackles some difficult issues and mostly just handles the philosophy of what happens if your world has no religion, but has gods and Satan, so to speak. That's kind of the world of the Wheel of Time, the Westlands, as they're called here in the map. But essentially, it's just a story of good and evil, and they do take quite a long journey, a little D&D-esque. The story begins down in the Two Rivers in this itty-bitty little farm village. Follows a man named Randall Thor, who starts the book around maybe 18 to 21 in that range. He's pretty young, as are most of his friends. They take a little trip across the east here to the major towns and slowly work their way towards the biggest town nearby, Camlin, which is sort of a parable of sort of the old style of medieval European stories, mostly like the King Arthur situation, that sort of thing. There's a lot of similar people that exist in that sort of area, have similar moods, similar feels to like Knights of the Round Table, Gawain and Galad, like princes of the area that are sort of paladins who do everything according to one ethical rule. But it does some interesting things with the way that people in the story have to think about things, how they have to learn stuff, learn hidden knowledge, forgotten knowledge. They kind of have to understand that, like, this basic story is that the world ends every 1,000 years or so, and then a new age starts, and something else has to kind of come up. And this story is sort of how that story could potentially stop happening as a cycle, hopefully. And it's a lot about, what happens when everyone can use magic powers. What if everyone can be a wizard? In this world, if you're a man and you can channel, you typically go insane because the source with which you pull magic from has been tainted, and you're kind of primed to go nuts, basically, the more you use it. The women don't have that problem, and eventually they have to kind of figure out why that is, and that's its own little mystery. But it's got a really great little world about it. There's a lot of different interesting people and even types of magic that aren't necessarily ever used again, like one-off magical characters. There's somebody who can like explore the dream world of this world more accurately. Like they can traditionally control their dreams and like travel from place to place in the world and see things that sort of happened in the real world or that are happening there at the time. And there's a lot of unusual types of magic going on in the world that I quite like. It's not just traditional predictable magic. There's someone who can like control luck, someone who can smell evil or murder. There's a lot of choices being made by the people, but those that have the power can't really stop using it, so they give you a lot of insight into the world and how it's interesting and how dangerous it could be. There's quite a bit of magical objects, like old ones that they run across in the world that have just been there forever, that are just planted in the ground. There's probably a couple on the map here, like the Tower of Genji, this big tower sticking out of the ground from thousands of years ago. Shatter Logoth, it's like a whole town that's been basically taken over by evil and completely sort of consumed, let's say. So there's a lot of different storylines, a lot of interesting characters that get to take over each chapter. So you sort of just follow that person as they're somewhere in the world to get a good perspective on it, and then you might go all the way across the world and follow somebody over in the Wastes or somebody in Cairhen. There's a lot of different parts of the world that interlock, and it's sort of a domino effect of prophecies. When you reread the books, to read the prophecies and think about them and not in terms of objectivity, like they must be true, but in fact, like a lot of them have like that conceptualization of language is not what you think it is. So like prophecy may say one thing, but it does kind of bury the lead about how some things must be, like for the story to end correctly. So there's a bit of a, is this what they meant? Is that what they meant? Am I supposed to die here? Am I not supposed to die here? Questions that often pop up and make the story a little more interesting in terms of people believing that they're safe or not safe, knowing that someone's after them. But they do a good job of exploring sort of the world as it is from many different perspectives. It's not just Rand al'Thor's magical story. There's Egwene's story of traveling from the White Tower where she learns some things all the way around to hunt for bad guys. She takes boats, meets other cultures, she gets captured at some point, the typical sort of conflict and climaxes you need for growth to happen. And there's a pretty decent arc on most of the main characters. I would recommend reading everything Robert Jordan has read. And as I start to wrap up at least these initial thoughts, I'd say the Brandon Sanderson takeover point, he writes the last 3 books, it gets real hard. I'll just say that right now. Some people like to make excuses for Brandon Sanderson because he's a big popular author now. But this was like his first book, more or less, and it shows as a writer. You definitely get the sense someone else takes over. Every main character that had sort of an arc or growth emotionally sort of stops having growth emotionally and starts to act like they were back in the Two Rivers when they were just a little kid. So you sort of get the sense that the mentality or the capability of the writer who took over sort of undercuts the main characters and gives them sort of a feel of like they're all bossy, complainy, whiny. They all have the same like, oh, women sure are hot, but I'm a married man sort of lines of thinking where characters didn't, like they used to say that, but then they stopped because they got married or they got mature or they didn't think about things as just, well, she's a pretty woman and that's why I'll describe her or that's how I'll remember her. They're just instead treated normally. Like in Robert Jordan's description of women in this book is probably the most woke shit I've ever read, if we're being honest, where it's very much like the women and the men are equal, and that is the underlying message of the story, that everyone is the same, and that all these walls we put up between each other are just cultural, historical, problematic for their own reasons, but that ultimately we share the same sort of genes. We're still human. We're still good people. And it feels a little like Brandon Sanderson sort of forgets how that works at a certain point. People get a lot more paranoid, people get a lot more suspicious, and they sort of just do things because the story requires them to, like Robert Jordan had left a note about it, but his ability to get us there felt very lacking. So, personally, as the final book ended, it was really just kind of a petering out and then it was done. I don't remember it fondly. I remember it as a different telling of the ending of this story because I feel like I had a different idea of at least how some of the characters would have done it differently or felt about the situation. But that is just the way of things. Some books can't get done. Somebody's got to finish them. What can you do? Would recommend the whole series as a whole. Some of the best characters you could probably, if you don't like, I don't know what to tell you, but if you want to like this book series, read Matt Cauthen's stories, knowing that he's the funniest character in the book, and you'll pretty much laugh your way through anytime he's on screen. Everybody else tends to be a little serious here and there, but there's some great side characters, great supporting characters, some fun accents even, like pirates, people that are essentially Japanese, have a lot of honor and quietness to their jokes, versus people that have a lot more honor and will do anything to keep it. So that's a lot of fun cultural touchstones in the storyline. Some weird notes that I remember as we read it aloud. Now, I'd say it's a great book to read. Even the last couple books are pretty forgettable and honestly don't ruin the storyline too much. They still wrap it up in a concise way, even if it is a little confusing. I would say that the last battle that occurs in the books is like 150 pages, and that's maybe too much. I'm just putting it out there. Having read all 14 books aloud, that last battle keeps going forever, and I think it was an attempt to be as cool as Robert Jordan is about tactical warfare because he is a military trained individual, and it doesn't really play quite the same as a lot of his writing, so I'm not sure it was necessary. I'd still recommend the whole series as a whole, just because the moral message, the ethical message, the writing ability of Robert Jordan is incredible to see how he ties everything together across so many books in a pretty small amount of time, honestly. I think the story takes place probably in less than 3 years, something like that. And it's a fun little romp. I love it. I would recommend. I do have a little tattoo from this book now, so it's permanently on me. So I'm not completely hating it. I would recommend. Tell me your thoughts. I can tell you some more in another video about words we used to mispronounce weirdly or ideas of how Brandon Sanderson sucks butts, and I don't care for him. But let me know your thoughts. Read The Wheel of Time. Give it a go. Read it aloud. It'll even be fun. I promise.